Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kent Justice, your host for This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. Our guest today is Dominic Calabro, the president and chief executive officer of Florida Tax Watch. That's a statewide, nonprofit, nonpartisan government watchdog and research center for taxpayers. This is my interview from this week with Calabro in his Tallahassee office. Tell me about, I guess, your view, Florida Tax Watch, and this budget came together really late and everything. And so often we look to you and say, okay, what does Florida Tax Watch say about the budget? And you got budget turkeys and that kind of stuff. So Dominic, just start with a broad picture. How's the organization feel about this year's budget in Florida?
You know, Kent, the budget actually came together with a good product. It just was a very, very messy process by which it occurred. A little bit messier than usual. They're not always perfect. As I say, two things you don't want to see in public, and that is sausage being made and laws being made. Well, this was probably more true than most years. And it was just different because, you know, for, I guess, the first term, the first 2 years of Governor DeSantis's service as governor, you know, the Florida legislature was very, very compliant. A lot of that had to do with he was dealing with the pandemic throughout it, and took a great commanding role and used the executive powers in ways that hadn't been used before because we didn't have a pandemic. Okay. And then on top of that, continued a little afterwards. And then, you know, he was a candidate for president of the United States, the highest office in the land. And it looked like he had you know, at that time, a good shot. And so a lot of folks were behind him and didn't want to do anything to upset the king, so to speak. And so they granted almost anything he really asked for. That changed when Speaker Danny Perez, he put everybody on notice that he had a different point of view, and also Senate President Ben Albritton. I think both of them were trying to exercise a little bit more of the legislature's, you know, independence as a important institution. I mean, as an equal institution with the executive branch, not subservient to. And I think that ultimately that's what the founders of our nation wanted, with, you know, appropriate checks and balances. The checks and balances, I think, Florida Tax Watch believes, are the bulwark of our freedom. That's what the founders of our nation really called for. And I think when they're used properly, it's a very, very good thing. It puts, you know, appropriate limits. The whole idea when we founded our nation was to put limits on government, not limits on the people. The government should be afraid of the people, not the people afraid of the government. Okay, that's a fundamental concept of our founders, and I think that's what the Speaker and President kind of wanted to do. Now, it did get a little bit, in some ways, a little bit more personal in some respects, like whatever someone wanted, someone didn't want. But at the end of the day, I think some really good laws were passed. The budget turkeys, yes, there were quite a few, probably fewer than in some prior years. Tax Watch identified 238 items worth about $413 million. We didn't say veto all of them. We said took them very serious consideration. The governor did veto a good number of them, equate to, you know, not quite almost $100 million. That helps. It's a check and balance for the taxpayers of Florida because they go into effect unless he vetoes them. Florida is one of the states that has a line, the governor has a line item veto that can pull those out, not only out of the budget, but out of any substantive law where there is an appropriation made by law. So over half of the individual appropriation vetoed by the governor were projects highlighted in the Florida Tax Watch turkey list, which, you know, during the years, and in fact, 1 year with Governor DeSantis, he vetoed 90%. We've had Governor Charlie Crist do 90. We've had Governor Scott at one year or two do 90%. A couple years we had Governor Bush, I think, did all of them. Governor Childs, 2 years of his 8 years, did all of them. So Governor Martinez did quite a few. So we've had on average about close to 3/4 of the items that Tax Watch identifies has gotten the scrutiny. And it's also been the standard by which the governor's office uses as one of its key considerations in the governor's vetoes.
Well, I guess I'd like to maybe just pause some of that right here and just explain to people how Florida Tax Watch decides what you would consider a budget turkey, or what are the factors that come in where you want to weigh into the executive branch and say, here's what we think?
You know, that's a great question, Kent. It's really about showing respect for the accountability, the integrity, and the transparency of the budgeting process. So the legislature sets in law and in budget priorities a method by which we fund the $120 billion state budget. Otherwise, it's, it's catch as can. I mean, could you imagine a large corporation where it has a budget, the board of directors says, yes, I know we have a strategic plan, but the heck with that. Let's just create a program here. Let's create, a whole division there, and it's catch as can, and it wouldn't work. They would go out of business very quickly. But this is government, so it's a different story. But nonetheless, in some ways, it's even more important because the people have no choice about paying their taxes. They have to pay the taxes or go to jail. So there's a special fiduciary responsibility, and I really appreciate Speaker Danny Perez and Senate President Ben Albritton saying that, using those words, that this is people's money, and we should treat it with a lot of respect and as a fiduciary. And so I think they try to do that in a lot of ways, and having that check and balance is very, very important. The other thing, tax law took 10 years to accomplish, and that was phasing out and getting rid of the business rent tax, the sales tax on commercial rents. Florida was an outlier. We're an outlier in a lot of good things, but that was one, we were a bad outlier.
And that's something we certainly covered when the budget came out, and hey, this will be a change, but take a moment to explain that and what the impact, I guess, would be from that change.
So what that's going to do, it's going to take effect October 1 of 2025. And what that allows is that the state will no longer collect a sales tax on commercial rents. Florida is the only state that did. So we don't collect rents on residences and so forth. But at one time, we were collecting at 6.5%. It was reduced down to 5%. Then because of some tax maneuvers that Tax Watch had recommended and the legislature adopted, helped bring it down to 2%. And this year, the governor approved what the legislature authorized and enacted was to phase out entirely beginning October 1 of 2025. So there'll be no sales tax on commercial rents. That's a good thing. What that means is that particularly small business owners now can hire some more people, one or two more employees. They can pay them maybe a slightly higher wage. They don't have to increase the prices on their products as much. So it's beneficial to the economy. Again, we were the outlier. We were the only state that had one, so we don't now. The other thing that was a really good thing is we provide a recurring paying down the state's debt. We established a permanent back to schools sales tax holiday in the month
You're
of
in favor
August.
of that.
That's a great thing. Through the years, some of our counterparts, the National Tax Foundation, others said, "Oh, that's a gimmick." Yeah, it is. It's not tax reform at that because it's done each year, but it was something that a vast majority of average tax-paying citizens enjoyed. Okay, and it coincided with a school year, kids going back to school, or we have a sales tax holiday on hurricane supplies and equipment, so that it's a good way of reminding people and encouraging them to be prepared. So those are the kind of things, disaster preparedness items provide, we think, meaningful tax relief so families and businesses may thrive. I think those kind of things were very beneficial. It happened, and we're glad to have been an integral part of that. And remember, Ken, this is a while ago, but once upon a time, we had the sales tax, we had a tax on intangible personal income tax, a tangible, intangible taxes. We got rid of that tax, which was the tip of the spear to do that. And now we got rid of this sales tax on commercial rent. And I think it's a good thing.
So one of the things when it came to tax relief, there were competing visions for how to do this. The governor's office had one idea. The legislature had another. Where did Tax Watch fit with those proposals? And when do you start weighing in on those?
Well, we have for many, many years, and we have in this time along. I think what happened is this has been a brewing concern, and we agree that it's a very serious concern. People increasingly cannot afford their either own a home or stay in a home, and increasingly can't afford their rents. So it's not just for homesteaded property owners, it's also for a lot of people that are trying to pay their rent.
Yeah.
I have 4 children, 3 of whom live in Florida, and it's very hard on young families to pay rent, let alone own their own home. Why? In part, not exclusively, because property taxes are going through the roof. Why? It's a consequence of our success. Okay, it's success that even before the pandemic, Florida's property value was rising, but during the pandemic, Florida and Governor DeSantis did the right thing. We opened Florida up. A lot of folks began to move here and droves, particularly bringing a lot of capital and growth. So what that did is it put a lot of demands on property. So property values have risen tremendously. We see, but also there's some concern as I see the Doge, and as others have said, Senator George Lemieux, our former MediaPass chairman, and others have said Florida tax law is Doge before Doge was Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. We've seen where local governments, in some cases, have a population increase of 4 or 5%, but in 4 or 5 years, but their property taxes have risen 70%. Okay, so what's happening there? This is too much growth in spending, and that's really where we're going to spend some time looking at that. So the competing proposals are going to focus on property taxes. They're going to focus on probably homesteaded property owners, probably close to the middle, people of moderate means. I mean, we had a lot of affordable workforce housing. Folks can't afford police, fire, nursing, medical technicians. Heck, even young physicians can't afford some of their homes. So we're looking at what we can do to alleviate that problem without busting the ability of our local government to provide core functions: police, fire, healthcare, public safety, quality environment. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm glad that we didn't just rush to judgment, come up with an idea, that we have some time to think it through. We'll have tax, which will be reviewing various proposals that'll help both homesteaded property owners, renters, and to some extent, business owners, particularly small business owners.
When it comes to what we talked at the beginning of our conversation about budget turkeys, what are some of the things you mentioned that there were some vetoes that took $100 million out, but are there some things that Florida Tax Watch really identified that are in this budget that you wish weren't?
There's still several. I mean, look, the governor makes political decisions. We don't. So, and that's fine. It's appropriate. You can't take politics out of politics, nor do we ever expect that. But I think a lot of them were principled decisions. We also had the benefit of having his former budget director that serves as a vice president of research at Tax Watch now, Randy Gunders, who also helped our team kind of go through all of that as well, and told us that they've always seriously considered, what the Tax Watch recommendations are. Very simple, Kent. You asked before, I want to make sure I clarify. The budget turkey is not really speaking of merit, whether it's a good or bad idea. But first of all, is it a core function of state government? Is this something that state government is required by the Constitution or state law? Is it something that people rightly expect and should have delivered by the state of Florida? Number one. Number two, is it properly vetted? Has it been thought of other statutory requirements to say, here's how we fund these things? And then we'll identify a project as a questionable item or turkey if it's funded outside that legislatively and prioritized process. Because if you don't have priorities, if you don't have empirical evidence in a thoughtful and transparent plan, it's not going to work very well. And even when you do have all those things in place, it may not work as well as you'd like. But if you don't, you can be that much sure that it won't work very well. We have a lot of water projects that are funded that are really important across the state for regions, counties, local communities. We want to make sure that those infrastructure projects for water that connect rivers and canals and so forth, and water systems, that they're connected, that there's a priority, that there's a good science behind the projects that do get funded, that they're thoughtfully started and finished, rather than just catch as can. Again, we want to make sure, just like we do the road program, that the Florida Department of Transportation has a great 5-year road work program and has priorities where the state roads and interstate roads and it works in coordination with counties to make sure there's a thoughtful process of making sure our roads are safe, efficient, and coordinated. Likewise, we need to do something similar in funding of our waterfront projects, because water is the lifeblood of the great state of Florida and being continue to be the paradise people expect.
Yeah. We'll wrap up here, but you talked earlier about the incredible growth over the last several years here in Florida. When you've got more people spending, whether even not just tourism, but people moving here and everything, does that change any of the calculations for taxation in the state and where adjustments can be made in the state budget?
Yes, I think it shows that we're again, the problem is we're facing the problems really have to do with our success. We're just growing so much. It's a different problem than other states have, but they're just losing their population because their policies are spiraling down because they tax more and more and more, and people begin to leave and flee. You see some candidates for the mayor of New York City, for example, that are just raising real hackles among both parties, the Democrats and the Republican parties. So that's part of it. But I think what we're really facing here is how can we show good stewardship? How can we show by using the budget process and priorities that we're getting good outcomes at a cost that's affordable to hardworking families and seniors in our state? TaxWatch is at the forefront to make sure that they get good value and that their money is well spent and that it makes a good difference in their lives. And that's what we've tried to do as some 45, going on 46 years as the eyes and ears of the taxpayers of Florida.
Yeah, thank you so much to our guest today, Dominic Calabro from Florida Tax Watch. And thank you for joining us for This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. Like, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. New episodes come out every Thursday at 9 a.m.